Hello. So we'll go ahead and get started now. Claudio should be here in a few minutes. Hey, John. People usually join kind of over the course of the first 10 minutes. For the sake of the recording, I'll do the standard spiel. I don't have the slides with me, but essentially, welcome to the virtual brown bag. This is our weekly open meeting for any developer who wants to join. It's done in a show and tell style, so feel free to open up your mic, ask questions, tell us what you're playing with, what you're thinking about, and really don't worry about limiting by the topic. We've covered all sorts of stuff from very, very nerdy Emacs stuff, which is me, to career advice, to interviewing, to very, very simple concepts. We're open to talking through all of it. This is really meant to be as open time where anyone can kind of chat about what's frustrating them or what questions they have. We do record these, so if you're going to share your screen, make sure that you are not sharing anything that will get you in trouble. Editing these videos is tough, and we don't want to do it. And that's pretty much it. I think, hey, Claudio, you're here, so we can kick off. And hey, John, you're on here too. So why don't we get started? What's everyone been up to?
Just came out of a backlog refinement meeting that was pretty enlightening, like having our product owner just going through some of the business activities things that we have to be aware of, and discussing the events as they happen, and who cares about those events type of thing, and starting to come up with our ubiquitous language around these areas, and getting everybody into the whole DDD mindset of where things should go type of approach. So that was pretty good.
That's awesome. Yeah. How are y'all going around setting up a UL? Like, are you doing the bounded context exercise, or?
We will. That's something I'll be bringing up pretty soon, where we should start like creating context maps and putting those around, because we started working from the outside in, just started creating some features to get some direction to the project and places that we can go. And now that we are starting to, as a team and with the business, to understand the domain better, it's like, okay, now it's time for us to start identifying the context maps and how they relate, right? What kind of relationship, if it's downstream, upstream kind of thing, and what are the dependencies. And then again, going back to it's very important in this system to understand what are the events, because in one part of it, we definitely need to look into like event sourcing, because it's very important to know what's what's the current state of the data, but how did it get there, right? Be able to go back and replay certain things based on certain changes that the users may need to perform, to see, okay, as it happened, that was the state of the world. What if we make some changes there? What's that gonna do to the reporting and things like that? So that's how we are taking it, like slowly but surely.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't. So how are you going how are you going about the context mapping? Do you want to kind of talk about that a little bit? What are your thoughts on doing it? Because I do think that's one of the more interesting things in architecture and DDD, and outside of that Juval Lowery book and a couple tips and tricks in the domain-driven design book, I haven't seen it addressed directly very often, right? And people a lot of times just tend to group stuff by functionality because it feels right.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's a yeah. Thanks for bringing it up. So it's interesting because like I've worked in many like big projects that when they were established, there were architects that knew DDD pretty well, so they've established those things, right? They've set everything up, and then eventually they were gone. And I've joined those projects like as they were going, and then rolled off afterwards. So I didn't participate on what went into the context map creation and all that. How did they achieve or reach those decisions? So something that I'm trying to strive for is not to look, like you said, for the functionality areas, but think about the subdomains within the business, right? So, for example, it's very distinct that we have purchasing, so we have buyers, we have vendors, we have sales, right? We have customers. Those are like very distinct. We have like warehouse people, warehouse managers, pickers. So that's another distinct area. Uh, in those distinct areas, there are business events that happen that accounting seems to be interested in, right? So accounting would be another subdomain within this context. So trying to take it from that angle, right? Not as
Yeah.
much about the functional aspect, but where do those business activities get created, and who cares about them?
Yeah, and just to restate, I think what we're talking about is a lot of times people have the tendency to be like, well, this is all stuff that has to do with billing, therefore we're going to put it in the same domain model, in the same component, the same microservice, whatever, and it's like, nah, just because you said the same word when talking about it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll generate a good design to stick it in the same place. So I like to think about it in terms of workflows, and that's one of the things that thinking in terms of events forces, which is a particularly good technique.
Right.
Um, yeah, the technique from the domain-driven design book is to think about is to listen for ambiguity in terms, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so two different people at two different parts of the organization say the word customer or the word student, and oh wait, they're actually talking about somewhat different things, and like where they really maybe the only thing that's the same between when accounts receivable says customer and when customer success says customer is the fact that the ID is the same, that they refer to the same entity, but everything else about it is different. Okay, well those are different domains then, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, because otherwise it's way too easy to just stick everything into the same area. Yeah,
That's exactly right. Yeah. So
and
we are.
and
Yeah. Go
yeah.
ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, and the approach, Juval's approach that I like because it's more direct. Is like just think about stuff that is most likely to change ever under any fictitious possible circumstances that are realistic, and like all the I think that's the more direct thing because that's what we want to encapsulate, and all the other stuff is just kind of other ways of techniques for getting to that that are
Okay.
useful. Yeah.
And that's what you got from that the writing
Yeah.
software book. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, component of the volatility design stuff. Like I like it. It's good framing for what all the other stuff was trying to accomplish to begin with, right?
Uh-huh.
Like the point was not to group things for the point sake of grouping. The point was to group them so that things are easier to change later. And
Mm-hmm.
if you group things that are likely to change together, there
Yep.
you go.
That's
That,
exactly right.
yeah,
Very cool. Yeah, and
yeah.
something what we have been doing while we hadn't done like a more in-depth like context mapping exercise, we had been because you asked about creating the UL. What we have been very specific is to make sure that we get the nouns and verbs exactly the way the business uh, you know deals with it. And something that's interesting is that And I love it that I got on that implementing DDD book that I'm currently reading, where they talk about like our role as developers, where the business doesn't necessarily know about everything that they do, and we developers, we have a role into helping them shape and bring more clarity to what they actually do. So this has been a very interesting thing because like my current client, they have a legacy system, right, that's already on the market, people are using, and we're building a new version of that system, rewritten in a different stack and all that. So there's a lot of things that the business currently uses in their common language that's very technical. It's just how they've learned, and so they refer to it based on the implementation that they've done in the legacy system. So we've been as a team just like kind of like pushing back to say, okay, we get it that this is how it works on the legacy system, but let's pretend that computers are not around us. How should the business be talking about these things? Right? And then so making this exercise, so every time I bring it up, it just makes the whole team with the product owner, the business analyst, to actually take a step back and think, okay, in the real world, away from the computers, what do we call that? So that's been something we've been doing like over the last year or so, and it has been showing up in the UI, in the models that we create, both on the front end and on the back end. The way that we're naming things, the way that we're writing the tests, we are very specific about calling those things out based on what we are hearing from the business. And then there have been times where when we started, we had one understanding of a certain concept, so we coded for that. As the sprints went on and we started learning more, it's like, oh, that thing that we've been calling this, that's not it. It's something else. So we do go through the work of, okay, let's rename that. Let's make sure that our models actually represent, our current understanding of what the business is.
Yep, yep. I want to stop a little bit. I think we had two other people on the call. We had one of them dropped. Hey, John, how are you doing? What have you been thinking about? What have you been dealing with?
Hey, guys. Yeah, I was sorry for being a little bit antisocial. I was kind of typing away here, but I'm John. My boss sent me this, this thing.
Cool.
It's my first time on.
Welcome.
And
usually we have more people, but I mean, I think Claudio and I were both busy this morning, so we didn't advertise it very heavily. Yeah.
No worries. This is great. Like what you guys are talking about as far as domain-driven design. I mean, I think this is where I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I've been on larger projects and being able to communicate effectively with the clients and having the same sort of jargon or not necessarily jargon, but just the same understanding, because I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think this is where architecture really gets into philosophy a lot. When you talk about how languages were formed and meanings of words, and or if you think about Aristotle, about
sure.
Whether there's absolute kinds and stuff like that. And I think it's really great, and I can really get off into the weeds with it because I think it's. But the thing that interests me is just being able. I think this is where I would like to learn a little bit more about evolving this and how much upfront design do you do to make you effective. And it just seems like a balancing act that you that you just gain over time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So I have two questions for you, and I definitely want to dive more into that. One is, you mentioned that you got a link to the virtual PROMEC through your boss.
Yeah.
Do you mind just giving us more context? Like, how does your boss know about this?
Yeah. I think he's worked with you guys in the past. I mean, with Improving Enterprises, he knows some of you guys.
What's his name?
His name is Boyan.
Oh, yeah. I
Yeah.
know Brian from the community. Yeah, he does join us quite often. I think he did do some work with improving maybe prior to me joining, I think. But yeah, I remember meeting him at the North Houston .NET user group.
Hmm.
Very cool, very cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks. And the other thing is, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, what kind of work do you do? What tech stacks do you normally work on, and that kind of fun stuff.
Well, I kind of do run of the mill. Right now I'm kind of just doing. Well, been at JB Poindexter for about a year. I hate to use this nomenclature, but it's like, it was before that I was at Occidental Petroleum, doing, Angular on the front end and Web API on the back end. Here I'm doing a little bit more just back end stuff, and some API integrations, and for their ERP system. And so, yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. API stuff, some really niche integrations with Salesforce and our ERP and things like that. Yeah.
Interesting. Cool. Yeah, Oxy is one of our clients, so you might have run into some improvers over there.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, so yeah, I love your question about how much upfront design and all of that. Coming from a time when we used to do like 2 years of upfront design to going into agile mode where we just do enough. So like in the last number of projects that I've been doing, like let me explain like the current process that I have on my current client. What we are doing is we have our business analysts who work with the product owner ahead of time to just start like counting at areas that we may want to tackle next in the development. And then we have backlog refinement, which we just had this morning, where the whole team participates, like every developer plus the business analyst and the product owner. And then they present the stories to us. We have, lots of conversations around it to make sure that we understand things and the words and the business and the activities, and like again helping even helping the business reshape their understanding of what it is that they do, right? Because sometimes again,
I just want to say welcome, Justin. Just so you have context, we're talking about how much upfront design should there be. Yeah, go ahead. So,
Visual or architectural?
architectural.
Okay, nice.
good stuff. So yeah, and then what we do from sprint, once we go through sprint refinement where we discuss like the bulk of the user story, we make sure that we understand, okay, how is this user story valuable to the business, right? Then when sprint planning comes in, we've already discussed quite a bit the stories. So we as a team take the time to flush out the acceptance criteria, right? So the acceptance criteria comes in the shape of like, the very simplistic, like, demo that the thing does this, does that, does the other, like quick bullet points. So then in sprint planning as a group, we're flushing that out with a given when then language. So, we identify the scenarios for the feature, the user story, and then the scenarios that we are coding for. Once we have that, then one of the first tasks that we have as a team is to do a design session around it, right? So then, again, as a team, we decide, okay, how are we going to be architecting for this user story? What are the pieces of the puzzle that we need? Do we have dependencies? If we do, are those dependencies already ready to be used, or is it something that we're going to just mock out? Because it's like, those are like secondary dependencies. It doesn't matter. It's like, we need a list of customers. We don't have it yet. No problem. We just identify, well, there will be an endpoint that when called with the following payload, it will return something that looks like this. And then we just hard code that API endpoint, and we let the UI development proceed so that we can put that in front of the users and have validation as quickly as we can, right? So that we don't spend a lot of time thinking, how many microservices do we have to create? What are the message buses that we need? Like, no, forget about all of that. Let's get the UI facing, the user facing thing first, put in front of the stakeholders, get their feedback. That's where we are learning a lot about their domain model, and we're reshaping things based on what we learn. And then a couple of sprints down, when we have a better hang of the concepts, it's like, okay, now it seems like we're on the proper track. Let's go back and spend, a couple of hours in the sprint, maybe re-architecting some of the things that we were doing on the back end, just making it more solid, more stable. Like, okay, these things, they were put in the same project or the same namespace. They should really go into separate spaces, even if they are still hosted in the same, say, C# project. We're already like logically separating them so that eventually you can just pull them out into like maybe separate microservices and stuff. So that's how we're like tackling, so it's a little bit of upfront design, get it out there, fix it out, see how it works, and then iterate over that. What about you guys? What you guys are doing?
Well, so I think from the high level DD point of view is you realistically want to have a decent understanding of at least a high level of your UL, which means having a decent understanding of your contexts and your components before you start. I mean, if I'm to reference Juval and writing software, then the answer is 2 weeks.
Okay.
Like that's literally what he says. It's 2 weeks for an architect or a small architect team for a greenfield project. If you're good, you're going to be able to identify all the reasonable stuff within 2 weeks. And any more than 2 weeks, you're going to be going into too much detail. By 2 weeks, it means 10 working days, which seems pretty good guidance. I also like that's added for him with, and that's 2 weeks to identify all the components that will, that will create the necessary bodies in the application to be resilient to any change ever. And if there is ever any change that requires you to make, to not make changes within a component, but really make serious changes across components, then you failed as an architect. Which I like how high that bar is set. Like honestly, like it's a good thing to strive for. But it is premised on like what you're doing and you've practiced a lot. Also, it's premised on greenfield.
Right.
In a system where it's not greenfield, what I found is kind of the best way to the upfront architecture that you need to do is not so much about the architecture as it is about getting a clear vision in your own head about something that would be significantly better in evolutionary terms than what is there right now, and being able to communicate it to other people so they believe it too. That's the bar. And then whatever the minimal amount of architecture for that is. In my experience, what that ends up translating to usually is you write up like a white paper on the wiki, being like, this is how we should be doing this particular thing. And then, you vet it through a bunch of stakeholders and get them to agree. And then you vet it through a bunch of lower level developers and get them to be like, yeah, I can kind of see how that would help. Yeah. And you'll usually have like a couple of people that are very excited about it. That's how much like architectural design you need, which again, like also equates to, I don't know, part-time 2 weeks or something like that, because you do it component by component. But then you have to actually do the project planning part of it, which is figuring out how the heck you will actually make that happen. And that can oftentimes take a while, specifically because prioritization enters into the fold.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, I feel like I keep referencing the Juval stuff, and I do think that there's a lot of stuff that he says that's right, but there's really only a limited amount. It's just we so happen to hit it all right in this conversation. But like one of the things that he argues is that project planning, not on the low level of sprint planning and stuff like that, but project planning of how are we going to get this thing done should not be separate from architecture work. It's kind of pointless to architect a thing without having some sort of plan for how it's actually going to get done within budget and within time periods. It's those are not concerns that you need to be separating. Yeah. But, by the way, side note, I was talking to someone about separation of concerns recently, and I was looking up its origins, and the origin seems to be Edgar Dijkstra, which I think right away should put to rest all this talk about like, well, HTML and JavaScript separate concerns because that separates concerns by technology, because that doesn't sound like anything Edgar Dijkstra would ever argue. When he was talking about it, he was talking about mental, like what you're optimizing for mentally at any given point in time. So he was saying stuff like considering how to do a thing is one concern. Considering whether it should be done is another concern. Considering whether it can be done within a scope is another concern. That's the level that the term actually came about on. And then it seems to have stayed at that level for a couple of decades, like where like it was mostly used by like functional programming people to talk about similar type of stuff. And then at some point in the last couple of decades, we just completely perverted its meaning to mean something that, as far as I'm concerned, is only useful for like little shitty arguments. Like about like, oh, you need to separate concerns because this belongs at a different layer. Like, no, nobody was talking about separation concerns in that respect. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, that's an aside that's somewhat related, but not super.
I like it because it always gets we've talked about this before, where like I one of my beats the first time I saw React was seeing like JSX and a lot of JavaScript and CSS and HTML all in the same file. I'm like, right? Because okay, those all may be tied to one concern, but I would like to see separation of intent, right? Because HTML, JavaScript, CSS, they serve different intents, right? One is for, the thing that you have to display. Another one is how do you display it? What does it look like? And the other thing is how does it behave? They may all belong in the same concern, but I would like to see that separation. Okay, this is for the thing that you're seeing. This is how it's behaving, instead of seeing it all like mushed together like that.
Yeah, but that's just an aesthetic thing. Seeing it, like whether it's seeing it, that's realistically
it's not
realistic.
Aesthetic in the sense that it's the like you said, the optimizing it for reading. Because if I'm reading, say, something that mixes up English, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, or what have you, it takes a lot of mental space to parse it out and understand what's going on. If those are separate, like if I have like a paragraph in Portuguese and that ends with, and then George said in English, and then here's this next paragraph in English, it's easier for the mind to follow that as opposed to just doing a lot of like Spanglish and, That's my point of view. It's just mental tricks to make it easy to follow the flow of what I'm trying to consume. What was that?
No, I was just going to say, what do people think about that?
Sure.
So it's not just us arguing.
Right. Yeah. So, Justin, John, feel free to tell us how off track we are here.
Oh no, I actually dropped the last 60 seconds of the conversation. I was with you and with the whole architectural separation of concerns, going through React, separation of intent, and then like I dropped for 60 seconds and I heard like pause, get feedback, and I was like, wonderful. That was a perfect time for that one.
All right, I'll give you my spiel about why with React and JSS, the way React does stuff is not a violation. First of all, I mean, you totally can separate CSS separately. I actually like having it in JS, and I like it having it in JS. So let's be clear on what the big advantage, the really, really, really big advantage of having everything in JavaScript is. It's that everything can be there could just be a single moduling and scoping system for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah.
That's the big deal. You don't have to worry about CSS and trying, like if you put CSS in JavaScript, you don't have to worry about CSS and how do I structure this file that globally does stuff but really only targets certain things, and maybe we use BEM but only use it for this particular thing, and so on. CSS and JS sidesteps that entirely and goes, here's a good moduling system for CSS basically, and that module system is functions, imports. You can still do cascading and stuff like that when you need it, but for the most part, here you go. Now, as far as HTML and JavaScript separating it out, first of all, there's not really any HTML because JSX is a lie. JSX is a little transpiling trick that I mean, honestly, I think was used mostly as a marketing ploy to get people on board with React because it does so little for you. And I mean, I've had debates about this, and where people are like, yeah, but it's like really, like if you have designers working on your project who it helps them to write markup, which fair point. But you, again, kind of, it is the sort of thing it is like, what exactly does it determine? Because it doesn't determine, it determines structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then with React, the entire point of virtual DOM is that you already have structure determined by the virtual DOM, by the component tree. So it would actually make less sense to have a parallel other structure, right? That is like, oh, well, that's the document outline structure, whereas this right here is the programmatic virtual DOM structure. Like, you might as well just couple them together at that point. And as far as having logic mixed in there, it is totally possible and does make a mess, but then the answer to that is don't do that, right?
Thank you. So that's, I think that gets pretty close to my point, where what bugs me the most is not having those things in the same file, is that people will you're going to read like if some Boolean logic JavaScript and then HTML and then some more JavaScript in the middle with some CSS. It's like, that if they were kind of like isolated within the same file, where you can see, okay, there's styling, there's logic, there's a structure of the HTML markup. Yeah, that's fine. The problem is that a lot of people, they completely butcher that.
Yeah, but that's not a problem of the tool. That's a problem of like the generally I mean, it's the whole aspect of you made it easier. You lower the barrier, and so because you lower the barrier, people didn't feel the need to become more capable with this thing, so they just jumped in without like getting better at it.
True, and it's
also, I'm not at all sure that that's like something that wasn't an issue before, because I've opened plenty of Razor and Jinja and whatever files are like, well, this has a ton of logic in here that should not be in here. Like, I don't think this is worse than what we had before. It's what we had before, but with a saner componentization system on it where you can actually create components without having to like retro files and do all sorts of other stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why when I first started working with React, I asked some of the existing developers at the time, and I said, okay, if that's what React code looks like, we are either using the wrong library or we are using the library wrongly. Like there's it cannot be that, right? So at least it causes this or sparks this conversation, because I got some like weird looks like, what are you talking about? And then I would go into these notions like it's confusing, it's messy, right? Is the library making you write the code that way, or is it just because that's where you are right now and let's look for ways to, opportunities to make it better?
Yeah, I've got little flags that go off in my head anytime I see a single React component that has like more than like 10 lines of code.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that's a perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes it's reasonable, but usually the answer is like, no, you can break that off into its own component.
Yeah.
And again, the entire point of React, as opposed to something else, is that it's dirt simple to break something off into another component. You don't even need a file. You just create a function.
But I kind of break that rule because I can lean into it being dead simple to break it apart. So like, because the refactoring story is in more times than not extremely easy, then I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do this right here. And when I need to split this apart, I absolutely will. And so that I'm not jumping in too soon from the whole optimization aspect of it. And that translates a lot when I'm working with, and so it's an interesting, this discussion's an interesting world, because here it's like me and basically two juniors. So like my day yesterday was setting up network infrastructure stuff to move things across FTP, validating certificates, planning for Plaid integration, messing with production database, and then telling our junior devs to go code a feature. And so when I'm talking to them, there's so much to do. A lot of times I don't want to be like, I'm like, don't get caught up trying to make the tiniest, smallest components possible right now. Like, go solve the problem, and then let's come back and let me tell you how to break this apart. And I can do that because it's so easy to break it apart and do that kind of thing.
Sure. And I think that's a matter of having a workflow that works for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But like, you would still want that loop to be in the workflow, right? You wouldn't like, I don't think anybody would claim that like it would be a correct development process if that ticket's getting done without that. Like, okay, let's see how we can break this up and simplify and be in the loop, right?
Absolutely.
Might be what we do, but a lot of the time, but nobody would defend that as correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, again, don't get me wrong. Like everything, there's nuance with everything. And so if it's like a internal support feature, I'm going to care a whole lot less than if it's like part of our payment flow, So everything comes with that whole little caveat of, well, it depends.
Sure. Yeah. That's good. Very cool.
What else do y'all want to talk about? I can wax poetic on React and stuff too, but I don't know. I like the direction they took it. I doubted I still doubt the JSX, but the idea of putting, the same stuff that y'all talking about. I doubted that for a while. I also doubted hooks for a while, but both of those have won me over as very reasonable trade-offs that give you a lot more than they cost you.
Mm-hmm.
Although I will say, like, it's shocking how few people write custom hooks, because
that is very shocking.
It's literally just a function.
Right.
That's all.
Well, and then it's also funny, you see junior people thinking they need to write a hook for everything, And I'm like, you don't need to write a hook if somewhere down that function there isn't a primitive hook. Like if there isn't a hook, you don't need to make just make it a function. Don't call it use whatever unless somewhere down there you have a use state, use ref, use reducer. You have a primitive. If you don't have it, why'd you make it a hook? Make it a function. And then you're like, oh, I don't want it to run. Cool, memoize it or cache it, whatever. It doesn't need to be a hook per se. If you aren't going to be right, exactly.
Yeah,
right. Hook should be synonymous with it's using one of like the 8 or 9 primitives at somewhere in its chain.
And actually, I'm pretty sure that like all the primitives under the hood, like I think use state, I suspect. Well, maybe use state and use context, I suspect, are the only actual primitives.
I think it's the other way. I think use reducer. I mean, I think use state uses use reducer.
Okay, well, those two are synonymous, but I think use effect under the hood is use state or use reducer. Use memo is that. Like, I think all of them under the hood are actually just those things. I mean, use context would be a separate thing, but I guess like that would jive well with like the understanding that React really brings like 3 things to the table. It's a state mechanism, it's a context mechanism, it's a virtual DOM mechanism, and everything else on top of that is just kind of fluff.
And I think, man, it's been so long since I've even cared about the virtual DOM. Like, for me, it's more about like the VDOM is what the tree, the hierarchy. Like, like the tree is more important than the virtual DOM to me. Like, getting to think about that. Now, back to your point of like the JSX doing a disservice. It does do a disservice if you truly do think about HTML and you're like, why isn't this CSS? It's because like, well, in theory, you are in the same tree, but we've transplanted that node outside of where the top piece was. So CSS isn't going to apply if you have some global CSS. And but context, if you think about the programming, the context doesn't care where you transform it to or transplant it to, it's going to work. Like even if in a new window, that was one of the coolest things I ever saw about that, was that I could open a new window and have things from my source window be in the context of my new window. And so that state just goes through the other window.
Wait. So you were using, it was like a window.open, so like a pop-up window?
Exactly.
Oh.
And so the context of the parent is available in the child window. So if you think about like sending events down through a tree, you get to think of that window as the tree, that new child window. It all propagates down.
So right. So but like on the browser level, they must have done some magic for that to work. Like you must be going through like push.
Exactly. Post message.
Like the push mechanism. Yeah, post message. But that's I mean that's a great implementation.
But I don't have to care about it.
Yeah.
I just open it up and I can be like, give me my context, even if it's in a window above me.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So if you think of like VoIP implementations or something like that, you can kind of totally see, cool, you get the context of where you were before you popped open this video call window.
Yeah. And then that for the person that wrote that little connector, it just becomes a matter of how do you bridge using post message between all this stuff, and that's a proper use of separation of concerns.
Yeah.
Then you've just separated to that one thing that you're worried about. That's cool. I hadn't seen anyone do that, but I can imagine how that would work. That's neat.
I used it.
Was that third party library?
What's that?
Was it a third party library, or did you all implement it yourself?
I think it was called like React. Like it was just a component on npm that was like React pop new window or something, and it just like works. Yeah. And so when I used it, I had like essentially a main window where you opened up. It was almost like a touchscreen thing that you would interact with. It was to replace a different technology. So we had this goal of like making it similar enough to kind of be there. They were used to it, but like a lot better in our implementation, what we were trying to accomplish. So we would use that to open this other thing, and it was like a multi-window application, but we got to not care about how we synchronize state across the two places. So we didn't have to like use any of our own mechanisms that were foreign to what we already had.
Yeah.
So
I get that. That's cool. All right. What else we want to talk about? I mean, do we want to just keep talking about React stuff?
logging, observability, random questions. Um,
What do you think?
uh,
What do you think about logging? Yeah.
so okay, first random question. Um, currently implementing Plaid in our flow to get basically verified route. Well, no, they're really about querying bank accounts.
Okay.
But we're not going to use all of that perspective. We're really just trying to get verified routing and account numbers. So we don't have to care about like micro deposits to verify that this is your account, or we don't have to care about like you mistyping the routing and accounting number. So it's like, cool, we can pop open Plaid, you log in through your actual bank account, Plaid handles all the security, and they give us back like a list of bank accounts and routing information and stuff like that and account numbers. They have a lot more offering, but that's like the most basic offering.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a pretty decent, I mean, a pretty involved flow to go from you clicking a button on my site to me getting a list of your bank accounts. And so basically it goes like you click a button, it comes to me. I have a client ID and secret. I tell Plaid, hey Plaid, give me a link token. Plaid gives me a link token. I send the link token back to the front end. Then the Plaid component pops up with the link token I just created. You authenticate directly to Plaid based on that link token. You get a public token back from Plaid that comes back to me from the front end. I take that public token, combine it with my secret, and now I go get an access token against your account. And so, but from the user's perspective, they just click once, log in, and they see their accounts. So it's pretty seamless from their perspective, but it is a decent amount of back and forth.
Yeah.
Well, two of the things that Plaid says is with everything they give you like an item ID. That's like one of your primary ways to track something. But then they also give you this access token it's basically tied to my secret as a company and your account, your credentials with a single institution. And that token in isolation can't be used for anything. You know, if you don't have my secret, you can't do anything. And the tokens do expire. That token is also one of the key things they claim the item and the access token are two of the key things you need to have for like support questions and stuff like that. And so it's like, should I be okay with logging those access tokens in my general log, even though they can't do anything in isolation? Just so when I'm running through my logs, sure, there's an access token combined with my secret key, which, you know, roll your keys, keep them in a secret, a secret provider and all that stuff. That's when someone could have the ability to like query your account balances or stuff like that.
But like, you would still need like those
secret.
expire anyway, right?
They're somewhat decently long lived, but if you get like an expiration, I can like say, cool, let me basically refresh it, with the whole that aspect.
So it's not like they expire after like 5 minutes or something.
No, it's probably like a day or two, or maybe longer. Who knows? I mean, I'm sure I could find it on their docs. I just know it's not short-lived like you would think an access token in OAuth is.
Yeah. So then, I mean, I guess then the danger is that you log it, and then your logs get popped. I guess you're saying like they wouldn't be useful without the secret. I mean,
right.
Yeah. Well, let's see. So if you have a bunch of those access tokens, I guess like to really know how dangerous it would be, you'd have to know how dangerous it would be to work backwards from a bunch of access tokens to get something useful. Because like practically speak, like realistically.
So I need to save it. So like I could save it in my database or I could save it in my logs. I don't know that one's inherently more secure in my opinion. Like both of our stuff is on Azure locked down, and they encourage me to save it.
Well, that's true, but saving it in 2 places is worse than saving it in 1 place.
Well, I don't know that I would choose both.
Yeah. Right. I mean, but you do have to save it in your database, right?
Debatable.
It's not like you're querying your logs during runtime of the application that's doing the logging itself.
Well, it could be it could be in an ephemeral store, like something that's going to disappear after like a certain amount of time. So it's not like ever written to our database where I have to worry about cleaning up. I have certain instances where I do have like an ephemeral store. And so, because like take CVVs, for example, like you're not allowed to store a CVV. Well, technically that's like the common knowledge. You can't store a CVV, but technically you're allowed to store it until you're allowed to store it for the purpose of completing an authorization, but it must be gone after the authorization is completed. And so for certain instances, I was like, cool, I'm going to make an ephemeral store where I can push this thing in once. It expires at a time limit. The first time it's ever retrieved, it goes away no matter what. So you can't get it more than once. And at least I can feel good about it's not on disk anywhere. I don't have to remember to clean it up after you get it because it's purposely meant to be used once. It goes away. And I could take a similar approach with an access token from our current use case. From our current use case, the answer is we're using it to validate and get this routing information, but we're not holding on to it because we're not going to query that account anymore. And if we want to in the future, I'll probably pop up the auth thing again and be like, yo, we're about to do some stuff with your account, authenticate again, trust us a little bit more. We're going to ask you somewhat often about this kind of thing. Because we're not trying to be like a YNAB right now where we're constantly pulling in your transactions.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so going back to okay, well, do we log access tokens or not? I mean, I think the first question there is it useful to log access tokens, or is it just hard to not log them because you're logging like everything else? But then
it's not hard to not log them. Like we have because we're in the PII world, we have a lot of stuff where it's like our stuff is set up to not log things.
Right. So is it useful to log them? If it's useful to log them, then I think that kind of becomes a business decision where you're evaluating that versus the extra risk of the fact that, okay, now your logs could get compromised and not the other stuff. And even if they do get compromised, then it's probably a similar risk level to having hash passwords stolen. But not even that. It's less than that because it's also stuff that expires. Even if it's, even it's a couple days of expiry, it does that.
Right.
Yes. I mean, I think it's a business decision, but you write up the kind of the risks and they're not that great.
Yeah. They have a section in there.
Everybody look at it would be like, this is hardly worth mentioning.
They have their section in their storage and logging that says log plat identifiers and IDs properly to enhance security. When contacting support for finding entries, you will need these. These things will help. You'll need one of these 2 things. And so I see that they say properly to enhance security. They're like, we're not going to tell you how to do this, but do it properly to enhance security.
Well, so what are the things you need when contacting support? You need that access token and something else, or
you can probably use either one. The item ID will probably be enough to do it.
Yeah.
But the access token is also I mean, it could be because I think some of the things that you do might get a very stable item ID, and the access token might be the instance in which you got that particular, the point in time when you got that stable ID.
Right.
If you retrieved it with this access token, they can say, oh, you got it between these 2 days.
Yeah. I mean, this honestly doesn't sound like a super high risk profile. Now, granted, if you get popped and Forbes writes up an article about it, they can make just about every dumb thing sound horrifying. But yeah, and then you're sitting there like, no, that's just the way the internet works. What are you talking about? But yeah.
Oh, trust me, we have one provider called they have secure in their name, and their API is blah 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 /noauth.cgi. And I'm like, cool story, bro.
Yeah.
Technically, if I have like an account number or like a merchant number, I can query stuff. And that's it. Like, you just got to have like the merchant. Now, granted, those are semi-obfuscated, but it's like, that's all you need. And I can like query things. Whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, that really doesn't sound like the thing that would be the biggest deal. I mean,
and the benefits to me is like, I agree that I don't see it as a high risk thing. And I like the idea of having a lot of that information for troubleshooting that's already coming from my logs, just being right there.
Sure. I mean, the other thing that I suppose you could do is take that same information, like you say, like, yeah, like, we don't need this information. Like, we're not realistically going to go to support and ask them for anything that's more than like a month old, right? And then you could always take those things, stick them into some sort of store that expires after a month, and put an identifier to that record in the log.
Or I could maybe I could even like hash them with a with a separate.
If you hash them, then you can't get the original values back.
Okay, maybe I don't mean hash. I can encode them, so that I can decode them.
Sure, yeah. But yeah, I guess that gives you a little bit of a security that's not. It's exactly as secure as getting the. Well, I guess that would be true. I mean, like, then as long as you store the thing that you're encoding with them with in the same place as you're storing your secret, then it would be the exact same security profile as if your secret and the access are
stolen. So that would have to be somewhere else.
Yeah. So that would be reasonable, I think. All right, we are at time. Good chat. I think I'm going to stop the recording, and yeah, this has been good.